The Oklahoma Sooners, Brent Venables, Todd Bates, they are looking at making moves on the defensive line by trying to dip in the portal once again and potentially take another player. And we're going to talk about why that is significant for the Sooners and Dijon Terry and why the Sooners should potentially take Dijon Terry. But before we dive into it, guys, go ahead, hit that like, hit the subscribe button, jump down in the comments below, and let me know what y'all's thoughts are. Do you think Dijon Terry is a take for the Oklahoma Sooners? And what would your thoughts be if the Oklahoma Sooners actually took Terry? Do you think it's a good take? So it's by no surprise that the Oklahoma Sooners need some more guys at the defensive line. This has kind of been OU's pain point this offseason in trying to get players. Because, well, you kind of started to hear some rumblings and news that maybe Jacob Lacey won't be available this season due to some health things. So all of a sudden, your interior defensive line guys becomes a little bit more narrow. And the question is, obviously, the Sooners need to dip in the portal. But who's going to shift inside? Because you've got a plethora of edge rushers. So does a guy like Reggie Grimes or Ethan Downs slide to the inside, put on a little bit more weight, and try to add a little bit more depth there? And that's kind of going to be what we're going to have to watch this season. But there was a specific defensive lineman who was playing last season at the University of Tennessee. He's played there for the past 2 seasons, and he played at Kansas 2 years before that, by the name of Dijon Terry, 6'4", little over 320 pounds, is now in the transfer portal. And if you guys follow me on Twitter, you guys remember I said this is going to be one that you guys want to be able to keep an eye on. Dijon Terry is a take for the University of Oklahoma. And at that time, I think a lot of people thought, yeah, but, production. Well, he's an interior defensive line guy. I don't understand why you've got to go out there and have 30, 40 tackles as a defensive line for you to be a great take. And here's the deal. When you get a guy like Barry Alexander in the portal, a lot of the times those guys know where they're going. So, yeah, you might get a visit, and they might put you in their top 5, but you might not actually be the place they're going to go. They might already have that kind of figured out. So, the 6'4", 325-pound defensive line. Here's why this is important. Nose tackle. You've got Isaiah Coe there, but what do you have outside of Isaiah Coe? Maybe a Grayson Halton. Maybe an Ashton Sanders plays this year at that place. But now you can add some experience and some depth to that position and give Isaiah Coe a little bit more of a backup. He doesn't have to play all the time. Doesn't have to play as many snaps. That's important because as you start to go through the back half of your schedule where it's going to get a little tougher, you're going to want that depth. You don't want your guys playing a bajillion snaps if they don't have to. So 4 years, he is a senior. He has a total of 51 total tackles, 31 solos. So they break it up into solos and assists. So he has 31 of those, 8 tackles for loss. So that tells you he gets into the backfield a little bit. I do want to point out when he was at Kansas his freshman year, he only played 2 games. So when I say in 4 years, I really mean probably only 3 seasons because in his second year at Kansas, he only played 7. So when you add in the 2 games to the 7 plus the 2 that he played at Tennessee, that it's pretty much 3 years. So we're just going to call it 3 full seasons. He had 8 tackles for loss. So 2 in 2020, 2.5 in 2021, and 3.5 in 2022. And I look at those ones in the SEC and I go, well, he had some actually major production in one of the best conferences, and a conference that highly covets defensive linemen. So I like that number there. He has a total of 5 sacks, 2 in 2020, 1 in 2021, 2 in 2022. So as I just said, with tackles for loss, this is a guy that you know is going to get to the quarterback, and he's going to be able to cause some disruption back there. So where could this relationship possibly lie? Well, if you're familiar with Emmett Jones and his coaching history, Emmett Jones was at the University of Kansas during the time that Dijon Terry was there. So maybe there's a relationship between those two, and maybe that's how he is going to end up at Oklahoma. I'm not 100% sure. But what we can be sure is, and when I was over on Jay over at Unfair Sports, I was over on his stream on Sunday night, he mentioned this, and it was actually a pretty good point, which was, hey, the kid's from Mississippi, his family there. It sounded like he might be moving back to Mississippi to be with a specific family member. And that was a very good point. Um, but if he's going to start visiting other places outside of Ole Miss and Mississippi or any of those other Mississippi schools, I feel a little confident here. However, when you go look at who he was being recruited by out of high school, you have Kansas, and then there's Colorado. Obviously, there was Jackson State, so it's probably Deion Sanders at that time. I would think it was Deion Sanders at that time. I will say this. If he takes a visit to Colorado, I'm not going to say it's a worry, but that's definitely going to be a recruiting battle we have to watch because Deion Sanders has actually made some pretty good moves in the transfer portal, and he's able to make a good pitch to kids like this. So Dijon Terry potentially could be a Sooner, and I think it would be a good pickup for Oklahoma. Again, you have really good defensive linemen. I'm not trying to discount what we have. When you look at it, you have Ethan Downs. On the edge, you have PJ Adebayor. You have Marcus Stripling, R. Mason Thomas, Trace Ford, Reggie Grimes, Jonah Laulu, who is shifting to the inside, Derek LeBlanc, who I definitely think, is, if he gets up to 285, 300 pounds, you could probably see him playing this season. You've got a guy like Kevin Gilliam. You have Ashton Sanders, Grayson Halton, Rondell Bothroyd, Isaiah Coe, Devon Sears, I think Devon Sears is actually going to be really good for the University of Oklahoma. You've got players. Now it's just a matter of what can you do to put it together on that defensive line. Because if your defensive line is going to be strong, you're going to see a completely different defense going into 2024 because the defensive line is kind of what holds your whole defense together. So I like that take. And then looking in the portal, not really a whole lot the Sooners I think are interested in or could go after. I mean, there was a kid out of Iowa State. His name was Hunter Deo. He ended up committing to Bowling Green. That was a guy that I would have really liked to have seen Oklahoma go out there and take. There was another kid out of Auburn. I'm not even going to be able to say his name, but just take my word for it. Former 3-star kid out of high school. I think that would be a take because you're trying to get a guy out of the SEC. The Sooners have already dipped in Texas State. Texas State had another defensive lineman in Deontay Washington. I'm just saying there's not a lot there, but there's still, I'm going to rephrase this. There's not a lot of former 4-star talent that you would want to take out of the portal still left. So I'm kind of curious to see exactly what the Oklahoma Sooners plan on doing. If maybe they see if there's anybody that wants to enter in the summertime and try to take anybody there. Personally, I thought the Oklahoma Sooners should have went after Tywone Malone out of Ole Miss. Not saying they didn't, but we didn't end up landing him. He ended up at Ohio State. Can't talk today. So, guys, go ahead, jump down in the comments below. Let me know what y'all's thoughts are. What do you think about the defensive lineman who has entered the transfer portal? And do you think the Oklahoma Sooners can land him? Additionally, if you have not already, go ahead and hit that like and the subscribe button.